Alrighty, welcome in everyone to just another edition of Just Another College Football Podcast. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Friday, September 12th, and we got a great show for you today. We're going to wrap up things for Week 3. Been a crazy time in the world, so let's take a little bit of break from that. Let's talk about college football here for a second. We got some final Week 3 thoughts for you to start off the show. Then we got some best bets in the middle, and then we'll finish off with a little bit of a weekend catch-up. I'll give my take on the entire AP poll drama. A lot of stuff to get into at the very end of the show. But let's go ahead and jump in. Let's jump into these Week 3 thoughts. There is a lot of things going on this upcoming weekend. The SEC really gets going and underway. We got 3 ranked matchups this upcoming weekend. South Florida trying to continue kind of their Cinderella run throughout this year. A lot of things to get to. So let's go ahead and jump in. And let's start with that Clemson-Georgia Tech game. That is going to happen on noon tomorrow. Incredible matchup. This line started about 6.5, I believe, in Clemson's favor. Now it's all the way down to 2.5. An incredible Georgia Tech team they're going to play. Sounds like Haynes King is going to be ready to roll in. The K. Klubnik Haynes King conversation or battle is going to be super interesting because K. Klubnik has not really been himself through 2 weeks. Not the guy that really finished last year against Texas really strong and looked like he was coming into a year where he could very well win the Heisman. On the other side, Haynes King, questionable health. He's one of those guys that every single game really, once you get into the third and fourth quarter, he's going to get up a little bit gimpy. That's just kind of the way he goes about business. He's going to take a lot of hits in this ball game as he does in just about every single one. The question is, what will it look like? Will Cade Klubnik be able to find his rhythm? Will Haynes King be able to stay fully healthy throughout this full game? Or will Aaron Philo have to come in relief? There's a lot of moving parts. There's no doubt about that. So it'll be really interesting to watch this develop. I do think Tech has a solid chance to win this game. There's no doubt about that. I do think they have an ability to get the run game going, really kind of shorten this game. I think the big thing for Clemson is you got to find a way to clean up the defensive side of the ball. It was far from terrible against Troy for especially the second half, but the reality is, in the first half, you got beat a couple of times deep. The run game for Troy wasn't perfect, but they got enough on the ground, and Georgia Tech's obviously going to be a much bigger challenge. But overall, it is a huge narrative game. There's no doubt about that, and really important when you talk about the CFP race, because Georgia Tech wins this one. The rest of their schedule up until Georgia, they will be favored against and have the ability to run the table in the ACC, find their way to the ACC championship without playing Miami, without playing Florida State, without playing SMU, I believe. So they're in really good shape the rest of the season. For Clemson, they would be entirely in disarray. They'd be 1-2 after 3 weeks. Dabo Swinney would have a lot of people breathing down his neck, and you'd be wondering if Clemson actually took the step forward that they seemed to take at the end of last year. Maybe it was a little bit of a mirage. This is going to be a huge game for narratives, a huge game for which of these teams you're pointing at as maybe the second or maybe the only team from the ACC to make the CFP. It is going to be back and forth. I've gone back and forth with this outcome. I thought about Tech earlier in the week, but Dabo Swinney's going to have these guys ready to roll. I can't imagine he won't have these guys ready, and I do think this is a game where it's probably not going to be perfect on the Clemson side of the ball. Can't promise we're going to come out of this week saying Clemson's all the way back and they're going to continue to roll, but I do think they find a way to win this one in Atlanta. You got Georgia-Tennessee, a game that is going to be really awesome. The more I think about this game, the more excited I get for this atmosphere. Now, would love for it to be at 7:30 just to give that little bit more juice in that stadium, but I can promise you it's going to be plenty loud regardless. Gunnar Stockton walks into his first road start as a starter. Going to be really tough. There's going to be a lot on his plate. The offensive line for Georgia becomes incredibly important because the run game has to get going for this football team. I think an interesting thing that I heard, I believe Cole Kublik talk about in this football game, and kind of an interesting one-on-one, pseudo one-on-one matchup, I should say, is Gunnar Stockton's legs against Arian Carter. Arian Carter is probably the fastest linebacker in the entire country, frankly, and you have Gunnar Stockton that has the capability of making big-time plays with his legs. Can Arian Carter and this linebacker core as a whole for Tennessee kind of take that away, or can Gunnar Stockton find a couple of lanes? Because I don't think this is going to be a game where you're going to have 45 to 42. I don't think we're going to have a shootout. I don't think we're going to have a ton of plays downfield. I do think Tennessee is going to try to test that, but the reality is I think the DBs and the secondary overall for Georgia is about as good as you've seen it in quite some time. I think Ellis Robinson III is a future NFL player, Daniel Harris, Dalen Everett the exact same, and then you have KJ Bolden kind of just lurking in the back end. it is a very, very tough group. It is going to be a very tough group to throw deep on. I think it's going to be tough for Tennessee to create those really, really explosive plays that they like to create. That being said, they don't have to create that many. The Georgia offense has been a little bit lackluster through 2 weeks. There's definitely been some missed moments. There's definitely been Gunnar Stockton maybe not ripping the ball when he probably should because there is a receiver there, but it's definitely a tough throw. He's going to have to be able to rip those in this game because you're not going to get too many opportunities. Against this Tennessee defense, you have to find a way to take advantage of those. That's something that Carson Beck did really well in a couple of these matchups. Stetson Bennett, the exact same thing before him. So you're going to have to find a way to make some plays if you're Gunnar Stockton and get the ball on the outside to your wide receivers. The DBs for Tennessee have been a little bit injured. They're going to have good players back there, I can promise you that, but maybe you find a little bit of an opening against a Ty Redmond, a younger player that maybe you can put Zachariah Branch on and find a little bit of an opening there. The reality is the Georgia offense is going to have to play a whole lot better in both facets of the game, run and pass. They're going to have to find a couple explosive. I don't think they're going to be all over the place. They're probably going to be few and far between, and which one of these teams finds those might just win this game. So I'm going to stick with Georgia. I'm going to stick with Kirby Smart. I do think he's going to be able to have his defense ready to roll whenever we talk about a Georgia defense maybe not playing up to their level or going into a game with a couple of questions. They play their best football. It feels like the exact same conversation we had before the Texas game last year, and we saw the outcome of that one. I think Georgia wins this one. I don't think it's all that pretty on either side of the ball, at least offensively, but they find a way to win this one in Knoxville. South Florida goes on the road to Miami. We've talked about this quite a bit. My opinion has changed just a little bit on this game. I think Miami might roll, and I hate to say it because I think South Florida has been an incredible story, but when I really think about this, the Miami offensive line is going to be the best position group on the field by a pretty comfortable margin. And the reality of Carson Beck as a whole and the Miami offense with Shannon Dawson is if they can run the football, they're pretty much going to be able to pick their score. Now, I do think USF's going to have a couple more answers to the run game for Miami than maybe some other teams would or some weaker teams, but I do think it's still going to be hard for them to not be able to, I don't want to say roll over, but just get kind of beat by this Miami offensive line for guys like Mark Fletcher and guys like Jordan Lyle to find a couple of openings, hit a couple of big runs, and then you're looking up and it's 24-3 in the third quarter. I do think USF, if they're going to find a way to get this one done, I think Keyshawn Singleton has to make a play early. I think one of these wide receivers, I should say, on the outside, Keyshawn Singleton tends to just be the guy, but he could, if he makes a big play early, if someone makes a big play early, we haven't seen Miami. We've seen Miami in tough moments. Obviously, that Notre Dame game got really intense, but they didn't trail in that game. They weren't behind. They weren't kind of playing from behind and trying to force things. Maybe USF can force them into that spot. That is the way I think USF has to go about this. If they win the coin toss, I'd probably take the ball. I'd find a way to get points on the board before Miami. Maybe you can get that offense to press a little bit, and then maybe you get Carson Beck throwing into windows that are a little too tight. You could be in really good shape. I do think Miami has a really solid advantage in this game. I do think Miami's going to win this game relatively comfortably. It should be said that regardless of the outcome of this game, regardless if Tulane beats Duke this upcoming Saturday, I do think this is a leader in the group of six college football playoff race. I do think they are still sitting at the very top. Tulane can obviously make it closer, but the reality is these two teams are likely going to have to play at the end of the year, maybe in the American title game. We have plenty of time before that happens. But I do think USF, regardless of what happens this weekend, it could be a 30-point blowout. I'd still have them as the number one team in the group of six CFP race. So no question there, but getting a little bit worried that Miami might just put it on the Bulls. Texas A&M on the road to Notre Dame. This is the biggest narrative changer in the entire weekend. I think Georgia Tech Clemson is very much up there. LSU Florida, another one that we'll talk about here in a second. But Texas A&M Notre Dame. Immediately, if Texas A&M wins this game, Notre Dame is officially dead and A&M is on their way to the CFP. There is no question about that. And I don't think it would be all that crazy, right? You would have a Notre Dame team that has a very young quarterback that would have to run the table and might not still be confirmed a spot in the CFP even if they were to run the table. And A&M, a tough SEC schedule, no doubt about that. If you can go on the road to South Bend and get a win, you're going to be able to beat a whole lot of teams. There's no doubt about that. You're going to be able to go on the road to Texas and possibly win later in the year or beat an LSU, I believe, on the road this year, if I'm not mistaken. So you're in a position where you still have plenty of work to do if you're A&M after this game. But This is a game that can totally change the way people think about A&M, think about Mike Elko, and can get this team to fully believe that we're not just a second-tier team that continues to knock on the door. We're officially a Tier 1 team. We have the ability to compete with the other Tier 1 teams. This is a massive one for this team. Texas A&M, I believe, is looking for their third top 10 win in a long, long time. They have to find a way to get this one done. On the Notre Dame side, it's not going to be pretty. I don't think you're going to find a way to win this game 31-10 and feel great about your performance coming out of it. It's going to be a gritty win. Every Mike Elko team finds a way to make things a little bit gross, a little bit dirty, and you have to find a way to get through that. Notre Dame's very, very equipped to get through that. I can promise you that. So the big thing here is the Notre Dame run game against the A&M run defense. Obviously, it's what a lot of people are talking about. A&M gave up 6.2 yards per carry in Week 1 to UTSA. Did have a bounce back in Week 2, only giving up 2.2 yards per carry, but it's far from perfect. It was even in that game where they gave up 2.2 yards per carry, the vast majority of that was quarterback runs that just did not work out. It's 4.6 yards per carry when you just talk about the running backs. Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price should play a huge factor in this game. If they don't, we have a lot of questions about the Notre Dame offense. But at the end of the day, I do think that duo should have a very nice day. If Marcel Reed can lead A&M to a win, I can almost promise you he is very much at the top of the Heisman odds coming forward. So it's going to be a huge game. It's a massive narrative game for a number of reasons, and I still tend to believe Notre Dame's going to eke it out mainly because they're at home, but it's going to be an absolute battle up there in South Bend. Then you got some other thoughts just to throw in here. LSU, Florida, this one's all about the coaches in my mind. I think people kind of overlooked last weekend the struggle that LSU had on top of the struggle that Clemson had, and you had some questions about the Tigers coming out of last week, and obviously that includes having questions about Brian Kelly. He's got to win this game. I think he understands that. It's a night game at Death Valley with a team essentially limping into this thing. You have to find a way to win it. For Florida, I think we all understand what's happening there. I think we all understand that if Billy Napier goes down in this game, he might not make it to the Texas game after the bye week. So it is a huge game for both these teams. It's a huge game for both these quarterbacks. Garrett Nussmeier has played good football, hasn't played great football yet. I think to be fair, I do think he played great football against Clemson, but at the end of the day, wants to continue possibly a Heisman run for him. DJ Lagway is going to have to make plays in this game. The LSU The LSU defense is very aggressive, very front foot. They play very at the line of scrimmage, going to come after the quarterback. DJ Lagway has to get the ball out of his hands quickly, has to execute this offense, and has to be very accurate with the football, or it's going to be a very long day for this offense. I think LSU is going to win this game. I do think they're going to be able to show up much better than they were a week ago against Louisiana Tech, but I don't think it's going to be perfect from both sides, and I think we're having probably a relatively uncomfortable conversation about one of these coaches on Monday. Then you have Arkansas Ole Miss. This is a game that might be the top chaos game. I picked Oregon State, Texas Tech earlier in the week, and I do think that's going to be a really fun one, but you look back on this rivalry, it's got weird games all around it. Taylon Green comes in this time around, and I just have to imagine there's going to be something weird about this game. We'll talk about it a little bit later in the next segment when we talk about my best bets, but I think this one's going to get a little bit off the walls. For Wisconsin, Alabama, Ryan Williams is back, and this game to me is just about Alabama should really stomp this team. Now, it's not to say Wisconsin isn't a solid team. The defense especially is very, very solid, and Alabama will have to find openings against that defense. That being said, if they want to be a CFP team, if they want to compete in the SEC, if they want to put week one behind them and continue forward, this is a good statement game. It's a team that maybe isn't on your level talent-wise, definitely isn't on your level talent-wise or size, and you have the ability to kind of push them around a little bit, really kind of flex your muscles while still playing Wisconsin, while still playing a team that really does matter, kind of what we saw last week with Oregon beating Oklahoma State. That wasn't a great Oklahoma State team. That was not a team that was going to be able to compete with Oregon. That being said, it still says Oklahoma State on the scoreboard, and it definitely does help people thinking about your team highly and definitely builds that team's confidence. So this is a huge game for Alabama in so many ways. I'm not saying they have to win by 28 or 30. I am saying they have to win relatively comfortably and look really pretty good doing it. Vanderbilt, South Carolina, I'm rethinking this one just a little bit. I think Vanderbilt might be able to do it on the road at South Carolina. I am going to stick with the Gamecocks as of right now. I think there's a couple of plays to be made for guys like Bakari Swain, for Nick Harbor, for a number of these guys that are uniquely talented on the South Carolina side, but I don't know. Vanderbilt's very interesting. If they do win that game, then we're having a very interesting conversation about what Vanderbilt is capable of this year. And then finally, just an interesting thing to watch this week. UTEP comes to Austin to play Texas. That's two top five quarterbacks from the 2023 class. Malachi Nelson was the number 5 guy. Arch Manning, obviously the number 1 guy in that class. And it's going to be really, really interesting to watch that one unfold. As long as we don't get any weird pooping comments from Steve Sarkisian, don't know what that was about. Very weird analogy he put out there. But I will say, if I was a Texas fan and I was in a position where Arch Manning might have pooped himself during a game, I feel pretty confident about that performance. Now, I don't know if that's what he's saying. Just all that to say, very, very good week coming up and an interesting quarterback battle at the very least in Austin. Don't know how close the game's going to be, but I do think it's going to be awesome to see what Malachi Nelson can do on a really, really big stage in his college career. But let's take a break here. When we come back, let's talk about my best bets. I have a number of things to talk about. Got Georgia, maybe a little bit more confident in the dogs than some other people. I think we have a rock fight coming up in South Bend and a couple other things right after this, so stick with us. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about my final thoughts going into this weekend. A couple of ones that I'm a little bit more wary of than I was earlier in the week, but at the end of the day, I'm going to stick with the picks that I made on Wednesday. Feel pretty confident in those, and frankly, early in the season like this, you're kind of throwing darts at a dartboard anyway. But let's get into my best bets for this upcoming weekend. There are a number of games that are really hard to pin down, and there's a couple of games that I feel weirdly confident about. Don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but let's go ahead and jump into this, and let's start with one that is going to be the main event of the weekend. I got Georgia minus 3.5 over Tennessee. This is a gut thing more than anything else. The line opened at -7 in favor of Georgia. Vegas is telling you what they thought about that game. They thought Georgia should be favored by a touchdown. Then it was bet down to 3.5. It jumped up a point, jumped back down a point, so it's kind of hanging out around that 3.5 number. I think Vegas won this one. I think they know that it probably should be around a touchdown spread, and they were hoping that people would bet this thing down. Sitting at 3.5 right now, probably the perfect spot for Vegas because people think this is going to be a field goal type game. I think Georgia's defense is a whole lot better than a lot of people think it is. I think there's a whole lot of guys, especially in that linebacker and defensive line group, that are uniquely talented individuals that will be playing on Sundays here pretty soon. I think it's going to be a nightmare for that Tennessee offensive line. I think especially without David Sanders in this game, you're going to be in a position where you're going to have to play really elite up front. You're going to have to be able to run the ball. You're going to have to be able to keep Joey Aguilar clean because he's played really good football through 2 weeks. He's been incredibly efficient, has executed that offense to near perfection. The reality is this is a entirely different game, and in the past, Joey Aguilar has made mistakes when he's been put under pressure. I think Georgia's going to be able to do that. And I do think Georgia's going to be able to score relatively early in this game. The crowd's going to be crazy. They're going to be off the charts in this football game. I don't think they're really going to be able to sink their teeth in. I don't think they're really going to be able to really set their feet and get after this Georgia team because I think Georgia has a little bit of an advantage on the lines of scrimmage. I don't think it's huge. I don't think they're going to dominate from snap 1 to snap 120. I do think they're going to have enough of an advantage here to just kind of hold Tennessee off throughout this game and get a big-time win and head back to Athens with a win they kind of need if they want to make it to the CFP. LSU minus 7.5 over Florida. I can't bet on Florida in this football game. I do not know what to think of this team. I don't know what they're going to do offensively. I tend to believe they're going to try to push the ball downfield as they often do. I don't think it's going to work out all that well. I think Mansour Delane is going to make a big play in this football game, and frankly, I do think it is a team that we've talked so much about Florida and them being disrespected and them being talked about in a negative light, and they've earned a lot of that. But on the other side, LSU didn't play their best game in week 2. Totally makes sense coming off of Clemson going into Florida, and then Clemson struggled, and a lot of people are talking down on LSU. So it is a team that has heard a lot of disrespect. Now, not nearly what Florida has heard. I totally understand that, but this is a team that wants to send a message in Death Valley at night. I think this is just a really bad situation for Florida. I think this is a solid team, a team that could turn it around if they had 1 or 2 weeks to find their feet with a little bit of a layup. They don't have that. They're going to Baton Rouge at night. It is going to be an absolute nightmare. I think that LSU defense flies around. The Florida defense getting back Caleb Banks makes me a little bit question this one, if I'm being totally honest, but I think Garrett Nussmeier puts up his best performance of 2025. I think the LSU defense makes enough plays on DJ Lagway to kind of rattle him and have him make a couple of mistakes, and LSU gets a relatively comfortable win in Baton Rouge. Notre Dame, Texas A&M under 50.5. I'm a little bit worried about this Texas A&M defense, but I'm really betting on Mike Elko to have his guys ready. I do think they're going to be able to find a way to put up enough points in this, to stop Notre Dame just enough, especially early in this game. I could very well see it being a 6-3 matchup at halftime, and then these defense kind of open it up just a little bit in the second half, but not a ton. I think Marcel Reed coming back from an injury is a little bit worrisome. Not terrible, obviously. Probably could have come back last week if they needed him, but I do think there is a reality of a guy that is so talented at running, that wants to leave the pocket, that wants to make plays with his legs, maybe just a little bit more hesitant to do that against a Notre Dame compared to some of the other opponents that A&M's had thus far. I think it's going to be a really fun one. I think it's going to be back and forth, a little bit of a stone fight, but I think these two teams are going to run the ball very aggressively. I think the two defensive fronts are going to be a little bit too much for these offensive lines to deal with, and I think this one's going to be an absolute rock fight. I do think Notre Dame wins, but I think it's something like 24-21 or 23-20 at the end of the day. New Mexico, minus 14.5 versus UCLA. New Mexico is a team that I think a lot of people are going to fall in love with throughout this year. I think some people saw it just a little bit against Michigan, but Jason Eck loves to play around with trick plays. That's the way he is, and I think he understands that in a lot of these games like this one, they're going to be physically outmatched in a lot of ways. Maybe not as aggressive as it was against Michigan, but I do think they're going to find a way to score a couple of times, and frankly, you score 14 points, that might be good enough to cover 14.5 against UCLA. So I do think New Mexico finds a way to at least keep this game close. I think Jack Lane and Scott Trey Humphrey in the backfield for the Lobos is pretty special, if I'm being totally honest with you. Jack Lane came over from Idaho. You have Scott Trey Humphrey, a very, very talented running back in the group of five, another guy in the Mountain West that is just downright special in a number of ways. I think there's going to be big plays to be had on the ground, and frankly, I don't trust Nico to not make many mistakes. I think there's going to be a couple. I don't think they're going to be entirely Nico's fault, as they haven't been in the first couple of weeks. But at the end of the day, I think there's a couple of mistakes in there. I think there's a couple of scores for New Mexico, and that should probably be enough against this UCLA team. The game tonight, Houston minus 4.5 over Colorado. I think Houston kind of wants to send a message, and I think everyone kind of does whenever Colorado comes to town. You know there's going to be eyes. You know there's going to be people watching, especially tonight when you don't really know what Colorado's going to do at quarterback. A lot of people are going to be paid attention to that one, and frankly, I think Willie Fritz wants to make a statement. I think they will make a statement. I think there's so many different things for this football team that I really like. Connor Wegman coming in very, very confident. Stephon Johnson hasn't quite gotten all the way into the mix, made one catch last week for 74 yards. I think he becomes a bigger part of the offense tonight. Tanner Koziel, very talented tight end that came over from Ball State after going to Wisconsin for a cup of coffee, essentially. And then Dean Connors, number 44 there, very talented guy. Absolutely someone that is going to be really, really tough to tackle for this Colorado football team, and we saw what that looked like against Georgia Tech in week 1. I don't think it's going to look too much better in this football game. So despite some defensive improvements, Colorado gave up nearly 430 yards per game in the first two games. It was really, really tough, especially in the ground game. I think Willie Fritz is going to be able to take advantage of that, and I think Houston gets a not necessarily fully comfortable, but enough. A 7-point, maybe 10-point win at home over Colorado, and at least has some people looking at the Cougars just a little bit differently come next week. Arkansas Ole Miss over 62.5. We talked about how weird this game is going to be. I think there's going to be points. Now, I am a little bit worried about what Austin Simmons showed last week on the road, but I think he's going to be a little bit more comfortable, and I think the big thing to watch here is Travis Williams loves to be aggressive. That's the way he calls a defense. They do an incredible job of calling the defense that way with the incredible tacklers they have all over that group, but I think Lane Kiffin's going to do enough to give Austin Simmons some quick hitters early, to Caden Lee, to some of their talented Deuce Alexander, to some of the talented guys on the outside for this football team. And then I think Kejuan Lacey is going to do enough in the run game to give them some openings on the other side of the ball. I don't think this Ole Miss defense is stopping Taylor Green. I think they really struggled at times against Kentucky last week, and frankly, I think Taylor Green's playing the best football of his entire career. I think he has the ability to put together a very, very good performance, and I really think we could be looking up 5 minutes left in the first half, and it's 21-21, and someone's driving late in the first half. I really think it's going to be a back and forth affair, and then I do think Arkansas is going to make a couple more plays late to win this football game, mainly because I favor the quarterback just a little bit more on the Arkansas side of the ball. But I do think this is going to be a back and forth football game, and frankly, I think we're going to have a really, really fun matchup in Oxford this weekend. On the other side of things, Vanderbilt, South Carolina, under 49.5. This is going to be a rock fight. Neither of these teams want to air the ball out. Now, they will hunt a shot downfield, but I don't think there's going to be tons of openings in this football game. I think there's going to be a lot of running the football. South Carolina's offense is very much feast or famine as of right now. It's either Lenora Sellers makes great plays either downfield with his arm or making plays with his legs, or they do just about nothing. I think Vanderbilt's going to do enough defensively to keep that very interesting. And then on the other side of the ball, I don't think Vanderbilt has a massive advantage offensive line-wise. I do think they have some big bodies and some guys that can really push some guys around and at the very least keep Vanderbilt on the football, keep Vanderbilt on offense, and make sure that they continue to pick up third down and threes, third down and twos, and just continue to move the chains. I think this one's going to be really weird. I think one big play totally changes this game, but frankly, I don't think that's going to come until later in the game, and I don't think it's going to be a game where you get anything more than maybe a 21-23 or a 20-17 type matchup. I think it's going to be an absolute rock fight. I think South Carolina is going to eke out with a win, but I think it's entirely a total toss-up over there in Columbia. USC minus 20.5 over Purdue. USC hasn't played new one, so it totally makes sense that people are a little bit skeptical of the Trojans. I am a little bit skeptical of the Trojans, but I do think they're playing really good football. Jade Mayava leads the Big Ten in passing yards right now. The wide receiver core is probably the second or third best in the entire country with Mekhi Lemon and Jacoby Lane. They have the dudes, and I think Purdue's defense is going to be better, especially under Barry Odom. I don't think they have the guys to compete with a Jacoby Lane or a Mekhi Lemon on the outside. I think Lincoln Riley's going to be able to find openings with his offense. And then on the other side of the ball, I don't think USC is looking at this game, super serious, or I don't want to say super seriously, but I do think they're in a position where they cannot play their best football and still win this game. That being said, I do think this defense wants to make a statement. In their first Big Ten game, I think they want to be able to go on the road, prove that these West teams can go over to Big Ten country and really do compete. And then I think these defensive transfers want to prove that a little bit on a national stage that they can really compete at the highest level. Obviously, Purdue is not quite the highest level, but beating them by 21 or 28 would definitely do the trick. So I'm going to pick USC to win that game by at least 20.5. I think they find a way to comfortably roll over Purdue in this football game. But a lot of different moving parts. In this week 3, it's kind of a weird in-between spot where you feel like you know these teams because you've seen two full bodies of work, but no one's really played anyone, at least the vast majority of people. So for a team like Georgia, what do you really know about them as of right now? For a team like Tennessee, you feel like you feel pretty good after that Syracuse performance. Was that enough? Was that really the team that was going to put you on a great path towards the CFP, or was that a really bad team that you found at the right time? So that's going to be a huge question, a lot of moving parts, but feel relatively confident in the picks that I have right now. We'll take our last break here. When we come back, do a little bit of a weekend catch-up. Want to talk about the AP poll discussion. Want to talk about the new portal and a couple other things we'll get into right after this, so stick with us. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about my best bets for this upcoming weekend. Feels like a very weird weekend. Feels like there's going to be a lot of moving parts and maybe some bets that fall a little bit flat late like they did last weekend. But at the end of the day, let's get into a little bit of a weekend catch up. There is a number of things that I want to talk about really quickly. And let's start with that big time story that came out earlier this week with the AP poll drama. This was a big story that came out earlier this week when we were talking about the AP poll. A lot of people have problems with the AP poll, myself included, don't like the system that they have running over there. But the one that kind of took the cake, or the one that caught everyone's eye, I should say, is Haley Sawyer, a reporter for USC football from the SoCal News Group. In her most recent ranking, she did not have South Florida ranked and actually bumped Florida up 2 spots after losing to South Florida. So people got upset. That's kind of the way college football works. That's the way college football fans work. The reality is there was a lot of not great pieces of that particular poll, of a lot of people's polls, and we'll get into that here in a second. But Sawyer did an interview explaining, said it's quote unquote not a perfect system, and quote unquote at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. First thing, she is right. That is not a perfect system, and we'll talk about that here in a second. She is not right about the second thing, and we'll talk about that here in a second as well. But I do want to say something before we fully jump into this. This person's very good at her job. She is more than qualified to cover USC football. She does a great job covering USC football. This is not her fault. This is the AP poll system's fault in a lot of different ways. If you're here to crap on Haley Sawyer, you're not in the right place. Just want to put that out there before we jump all the way in. But there is a lot of people coming after this person, and don't need to necessarily pile on here. Yes, the ballot was not great. There's no doubt about that. So let's talk about this here for a second. The reality is the AP voting system is really dumb. We have gotten to a place where beat reporters are very good at doing what they do. They cover a specific team, they show up early, they stay late, they go to every press conference, they make sure that they are fully up to date with the football team that they cover. That is their job. That's what they get paid for. They should do nothing else than do that. But the reality is that does not put them in a great position to know what's going on with the entirety of college football. To, maybe you can watch on a second or third screen when you're covering the football game. That isn't really watching the game, at least to the level that I would like my AP poll voters to be watching the game. And I don't think that's too much to ask. I think that's the big thing here is for a very long time, beat reporters were kind of the only people we could turn to for this. There weren't enough games on TV. There wasn't enough people really paying attention to the level that they are now. Now I can turn and probably give you 30 names off the top of my head that could do this very, very efficiently and watch every single game and know exactly what they're talking about every single week about just about every single team. No one's going to be perfect. It's very, very known that every single person that covers college football, that tries to cover it in a national light, it's very hard. There's a number of different moving parts. It's really hard to know exactly what's going on in every corner of the country. But there are people that do it a little bit better than some of these AP poll voters because they have more ability to. They have more time to. They don't have to focus so solely on one football team. That's their job. The beat reporters should be focusing on one football team. They shouldn't have to be focusing on everyone so the AP poll is perfect. The other part of that, the AP poll system we know isn't a perfect system. That can be put by the wayside. We'll talk about that here in a second. But the idea that it doesn't matter is not true. I think the reality is there's a number of people saying, and it's not necessarily a terrible take, I think it shouldn't matter. I think in an ideal world, the AP poll would be Twitter fodder. It would be arguments. It would be fun little stuff online, and you would wait for the quote-unquote real rankings to come out with the CFP poll. The problem with that is when you have the AP poll, you're deciding what is a ranked win and what isn't a ranked win in week 2. The CFP poll doesn't do that. They don't retroactively make polls for weeks 1 through 10 so they make sure that they have the right ranked matchups, the right ranked strength of schedule. They take a lot of that from the AP. It's also assuming that the CFP committee is really into football and really cares about what they do and always is locked in and knows everything about the game of football. They don't. They're really good at what they do, and what they do is being an athletic director, being a president of a university. That's not being locked in all around the country. The reality of the AP poll is, for a very long time, really, for at least the last 15 years, probably further back than that, they've been able to do this a little bit better. And they've left a lot of resources, a lot of people on the table that would be more than willing to give your AP poll every Sunday, that would be more than willing to help out this, just become a better system overall so we don't get to the end of the season and it's not, why does the SEC always have the best strength of record? It's like, because they're in the AP poll a lot. And you can argue one way or the other if that's fair or not. I tend to believe the AP poll for the majority of the time gets it relatively right. I don't think it's perfect. I think it's far from perfect in a number of ways. But I do think we have a very visceral reaction to the AP poll. But the reality is it shouldn't matter. It shouldn't be something that really does impact teams' ability to make the CFP and not. It does. It does, because the CFP committee is not fully locked in every season. They're not making their own rankings every single week, so they make sure that they know what's a ranked matchup and what's not, what's a ranked win and what's not, who has the best strength of schedule, who has the best strength of record. It's really hard to do this. I totally understand that. It's incredibly hard to make a poll that is right. In fact, it might be downright impossible in a game like college football to make it fully right. But there are hundreds and hundreds of people that would be more than willing, that watch every game, that would be more than willing to come in on Sunday and put together a poll. And they'd put together a better poll. It wouldn't be perfect, and it wouldn't be hopefully the end all be all when we talk about the CFP. I do think it would be a whole lot better, and it just feels like we're leaving resources on the table that can make this sport better, that can make it make sense to more people, and can make it a little bit more fun. Because I do think there's AP Bowl voters that put together their preseason rankings and just kind of slot teams slowly down. If they start to lose, a team like Texas, there's not really a good argument for them to be a top 10 or a top 12 team right now. They're number 7 in the rankings, and it's just kind of reality of where they were sitting going into the season. Now, I don't think Texas is a bad team. I think they will be more than fine throughout the season. But the reality of the matter is they haven't put together a resume that can tell you they are a top 12 or even really a top 15 teams in some ways. We have to find a way to drop Texas in the rankings, put them lower in the top 25, while still understanding that they have the ability to climb up, while still understanding that we can bump them up 6 spots if they get a massive win, or if someone else loses by a ton, we can bump them up then. There is an ability to do this better, is really all I'm saying here. I know that was kind of a little bit of a word salad, apologies for that, but more than anything else, Haley Sawyer is not the villain here by any means. She is a person that is trying to do a job and then trying to put out an AP poll. It is very, very hard to do what she's doing, and she made a mistake. People make mistakes. It's not a huge deal. The problem that I have is the system that we've set up is not the way that it should be. It's not, especially in a sport like college football that has so much passion, that has so many fans that would love to be a part of this process. You're putting it in the hands of people that have just been in their position for a long time, or this vote has just been passed down between people over the last 20, 40, 50 years. You gotta find a way to do this a little bit better, or you have to find a way to get the CFP committee in a room and say, you were to leave everything from the AP poll by the wayside. You were to take what you think about certain teams. There's no such thing as a quote-unquote ranked win before the CFP thing comes out. You have to decide that on your own. It's a very tough process, and it would definitely elongate the time and kind of elongate the responsibilities of the CFP committee, and I don't think they necessarily want that, but the reality is, I do think there's a situation where it's not a specific person's fault. It's the entire situation's fault, the entire system's fault, and I think we put it in a position where it is never going to be perfect. It's got to be able to be better than this, more than anything else. It just has to be able to be a lot cleaner. There has to be people that are more than willing, that watch all the games, to fill out a bracket, to fill out a poll every single week, and frankly, there just has to be a better way to disseminate all this information. It is a very, very weird thing. Obviously, this reporter got totally killed. I don't think she should anymore. I think we're more than fine. Everything was going to be okay. Definitely a little bit of frustration. There's no doubt about that. I think there's a lot of people out there that were looking at that and saying, I'd love to have an AP poll vote. And I definitely take it a little bit more seriously than some of these people do. I have a frustration with the entire system, and frankly, a lot of systems in college football that leave a lot of resources and a lot of people on the table that would be more than happy to help with this. The new transfer portal idea is something that kind of circulated earlier this week. Don't know if people heard about it because we're kind of lost in the football world right now. But a 10-day portal period in early January is the idea that have a lot of people kind of talking as of right now around the college world. It seems like there's kind of two camps right now. It seems like the SEC, sort of the ACC, they've kind of been a little bit back and forth, and the Big 12 are firmly in favor of this idea. I think it would start right after the quarterfinal games on the 1st and then go right before the semifinal games on the 10th or on the 12th, something like that. So I do think it's a situation that this can very well work. I think you're in a position with the transfer portal where I don't think people need it to change too much. I don't think they need the actual mechanism to change. I think they need the timing to change, and I think they need the amount of time that they have to be focused on it to change, because the reality of this, the month of December for college football coaches is a nightmare. There's no ability for them to really fully prepare their team the way they want to while still doing the portal, while still doing recruiting and locking up classes late into December, while doing the things that they're outright forced to do in a lot of different ways. We have to find a way to reward the teams that made the CFP and say, you're going to be more than fine. You have the ability to go through round one, go through the quarterfinals, and then you get a little bit of a break. And you have an opening to maybe go talk to some guys. Or there's only 4 teams there. So you only have 4 teams that are quote unquote hurts those teams. And frankly, I think they'd be okay with missing a little bit of time for the portal to find a way to win a national title. So I think it's a little bit of a back and forth. And it's never going to be a perfect timetable, plainly because a lot of these guys have to get enrolled in classes before they get into the new semester. Obviously, that's a little bit of a malleable thing nowadays, but I do think it's still a thing that has to have the semblance of mattering, I suppose, is the way I'll put that. But it's going to be a messy process. The transfer portal is never going to be easy. There's never going to be a perfect way to go about it. There's always going to be fan bases that are mad at someone for leaving, like maybe Tulane fans are feeling a little bit right now about Darian Mensah. But the reality is there has to be a better way to go about it. There has to be a cleaner way to go about it. And I don't know what's going to happen with the Big Ten and how they feel about this. I haven't heard the counter proposal yet from the Big Ten, so I don't know what their ideas on it are. I don't know what they're proposing. I've always been in favor of one period. I don't really care if it's in January or April. I don't think it's a huge difference. Now, for the players, it's very different because you only have the summer to get ready and really fall camp to get ready for the season instead of having spring camp and going all the way through. So I totally understand that part of it. But more than anything, we have to find a way to make life a little bit easier on the coaches. We have to give the players a very crystalline structure so they understand when they're allowed to reach out to teams, so we don't get lost in the tampering world that college football has gotten lost in a number of times. We just have to find a way to do this a little bit cleaner, a little bit better. We'll see how that unfolds. We'll see if it's right after the quarterfinal games or it's later in April or it's in the middle of February. I don't know how that's going to work. It is going to be a very, very kind of fluctuating thing throughout the next little bit, but it does sound like we're making a couple of strides towards the transfer portal being, I don't want to say fixed, but maybe a little bit better than it has been in the past. And hopefully that is something that we can kind of carry forward and at the very least have a more comprehensive system, have a system that actually makes sense to fans instead of one that really confuses and frustrates them. Biff Poggi is taking over for Michigan over the next 2 weeks. Just wanted to talk about Biff Poggi, if I'm being totally honest. That guy's awesome. He's my absolute favorite college football coach. Frankly, he has not been a head coach very often, but whenever you see him, that's a football guy. That's a guy you want to be around. He is taking over for Sharon Moore. He is suspended for these next 2 games. If you forgot that entire situation that happened, he is going to be suspended for Central Michigan and then Nebraska next week. It's going to be really interesting to watch this. Now, they should be able to handle Central Michigan as I wonder what's happening with Connor Stallions this weekend. He's got an interesting matchup there. But at the end of the day, Biff Poggi taking over, it is going to be a really interesting thing to watch, especially when they go into Nebraska. It's a game that Michigan's probably got to win. If they want to find a way to have a successful season, go at least 8-4, and find a way to really kind of build off this year, losing to Nebraska is not the way to do it. So he's going to step into a massive role. Obviously, you have 2 incredible coordinators that will be able to carry a lot of the weight, but it's going to be really interesting to watch this unfold. He was the head coach for the Charlotte 49ers for a couple of years, was at Michigan prior to that with Jim Harbaugh, so made his way back to the Wolverines, and he's just an awesome dude. He's a guy I'm really excited to see on the sideline. Hopefully he will have that exact look that he has in that picture, because could not wait to see those cutoff sleeves on Biff Poggi. But incredible football coach, a guy that will be really interesting and frankly could very well change a lot of things in the Big Ten if they find a way to win that Nebraska game, or especially if they lose it. And then some finally injury updates before we get out of here. Clemson at Georgia Tech. Haynes King should be ready to go in this football game. A couple other Tech players that should be ready to roll in this game, and it's going to be really interesting to watch this one. You don't know how high of a percentage that Haynes King is at any given moment. Frankly, I don't think he walks around at anything better than 85% in a health perspective, but he is a guy that's going to be ready to roll, and frankly, he's a guy that's not going to back down from any challenge. There's no doubt about that. For Georgia Tennessee, we talked about this earlier. Tennessee is going to be missing both corners, Ricky Gibson and Jermon McCoy. Ty Redmond's going to be a very good player. Colton Hood's played really good football early on, so I think they'll be relatively fine in the grand scheme of things. Now, if Gunnar Stockton's able to open things up like he did against the Notre Dame, maybe they have a little bit of more opening than I'm thinking. But right now, I wouldn't worry too much about that Tennessee back end. For LSU Florida, Braylon Moore and Trey Green are questionable for this one. It doesn't sound like Braylon Moore is going to be able to go. That gives a little bit more opening to a guy like Caleb Banks, who is back for Florida at defensive tackle. he's a nightmare. He might be the most athletic guy on the football field, including Harold Perkins. He is a absolute freak athlete and a guy that can totally change this football game on a dime. Florida did not have him last week. We'll see if they can get everything out of him. And then for Wisconsin, Alabama, Ryan Williams is back. He was out last week with a concussion. He is back in the mix, and like I talked about earlier, that's a game where Alabama's probably got to flex their muscles, or people still have a big-time problem with Kalen DeBoer moving forward. So that's going to be really fun to watch. We will obviously get into all of it on Monday. There is a number of things to watch this upcoming weekend. It is an incredible, incredible weekend of college football. I think at a time that a lot of people need it. Obviously been a very, very weird time in the world. Let's take our mind off it for just a second. Let's focus on college football for at least the next 24 hours. Let's enjoy this upcoming weekend, and we'll see you on Monday. It was an incredible, incredible weekend coming up. There is a number of big-time games with a number of CFP implications. We will be back to talk about it on Monday. I can promise you that. But thank you so much for tuning in. Please do like, subscribe, comment, do all of that great stuff. It means the world to me. And I'll see you guys on Monday to break down what I tend to believe is going to be an incredible Saturday of football.